For millions of students around the world, it is their dream to study in the US, and if it's on a scholarship, what can be better? Today, I'll tell you the story of a girl whose dream of being in the US soon ended in a nightmare. This is the story of Arpana Jinaga. So, Didi, have you heard of Arpana Jinaga? Do you ever recall even listening to this name ever?
No, I don't recall hearing this name ever.
So, Arpana Jinaga was born on November 3rd of 1984 in Hyderabad, Telangana, India, to her father, Baswaraj C. Jinaga, a professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University, where he headed the School of Information Technology, and her mother, Nirmala, who was a homemaker. A few years after Arpana's birth, her younger sister Pavitra was born. Growing up, Arpana was athletic and showed a particular interest in gymnastics. But on top of all this, she had a very creative mind and was constantly writing and exploring art. But as she matured, it became clear that she had the same technical mind as her father, who was a professor of computer engineering, so she decided to take up engineering herself. Arpana finished grades 11 and 12th from Nalanda Junior College and completed her undergraduate in engineering at VNR Vignajyoti Institute of Engineering and Technology. In both intermediate and engineering, she topped her university. Not only this, she participated in many hardware design competitions, and in one such competition, she designed a microchip in the year 2005, where she was the only one representing Asia, and she got the runners-up position for designing an advanced communication jammer, a device that disrupts radio and cell waves.
My god, this girl was brilliant.
Yeah, again, completely unmatched, right? We've never heard of anyone like this. In fact, Arpana's academic excellence was highlighted by the New Indian Express newspaper way back in the June of 2005 in a column which was titled Young Inventors. Because of these achievements, foreign universities came calling with scholarships, and Arpana decided to attend Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. Arpana left for the US in 2005, the same year she completed engineering. She later pursued her master's in science in embedded systems. After completing her master's, she became among the world's top 20 professionals in embedded systems. With a resume like that, of course, she had no problems whatsoever getting a job right away, and days after her graduation, she moved from New Jersey to Redmond, Washington State, which is about 24 kilometers east of Seattle, Washington. Just to be clear, Washington DC is the capital of USA, and here we're talking about Washington State, which is very close to the Canadian border. Redmond is best known as the home of companies like Microsoft and Nintendo. The city has an extensive technological industry. In addition to being a suburban or a bedroom community, the community of Redmond in Seattle is also known as the bicycle capital of the Northeast. Initially, Arpana used to share accommodations with her friends. She eventually moved to Valley View Apartments to unit number 8946, and this apartment was on the third floor. She worked as a software quality assurance engineer for the tech giant EMC, which is now known as Dell EMC, and true to her name, Arpana was incredibly hardworking and very dedicated. Within 6 months of being at this company, she managed to secure a promotion and was considered a quote-unquote rising star by the management at Dell EMC. By October of that year, she had already scored yet another promotion, and she was destined for extraordinary things. On a personal front, Arpana was very friendly with everyone and befriended almost her entire building right away. Her social life had exploded once she moved to Redmond, Seattle. Out of a burst of total spontaneity, Arpana even purchased a motorcycle that she didn't even know how to ride. But Arpana loved a challenge. She joined a local motorcycling club which was known as the Pacific Northwest Riders. And whatever free time she managed to find, she volunteered at the local fire department. She even volunteered at the local animal shelter where she helped care for and attend to many unwanted pets. Arpana even started taking taekwondo, riding along with her Pacific Northwest riders, and she rescued lots of animals for the animal shelters in Bellevue. Friends recall that Arpana spoke of opening her own animal life wildlife sanctuary for endangered species in the future. Along with all this, I don't know how this woman found any time. Uh, you can actually hear her singing beautifully in many of the recordings which are available. At Pacific Northwest Riders, she met Aaron Gertler, who was studying and working as an X ray technician and studying at a medical school. They were really interested in each other but were not officially dating, but they because they weren't sure whether they're going to be in the Seattle area for the long run, not probably long enough to sustain a relationship. All the residents who lived in Valley View apartments back in the year 2008 were young professionals, and many of the residents got together and decided that they would have a Halloween party to remember. Not only would they dress up, but they would also open their apartments and decorate all their apartments with different themes so that visitors could go from one apartment to another experiencing different things. So all the apartments were lined with each other, they were connected in one long corridor. So basically, Didi, did you understand what this apartment looked like?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Also, all the apartments have a house to their left and one to their right, but there is nothing in front. So it's like a long corridor. And
On the evening of October 31st of 2008, Halloween had the rare fortune of falling on a Friday. Arpana went to work and then, with a few of her friends from the apartment building, they all got started on decorations and food for their individual apartments. Arpana bought a lot of ready to eat pizzas for everyone and wore a Red Riding Hood costume. That night, Arpana and at least three of her neighbors would open their apartment for everyone in the party. Arpana was simply giddy with happiness at the prospect of this party. More than 2 dozen people would filter through the numerous apartments that evening, included Arpana's, and she had made her apartment look like a haunted forest. Most of the guests left Arpana's apartment for her neighbors just around 9 p.m. At some point in the evening, it would be reported that Arpana argued with a male partygoer, but Arpana would quickly move on and seem to enjoy the rest of the party. At one point, many people came to Arpana's apartment to eat pizza, and people were literally spilling out of her apartment. That's when someone called Neil got into a fight with a man called Emmanuel. Arpana apparently assisted Emmanuel with his nosebleed.
okay, these are a lot of names. So do you want me to remember all these names?
So I'm specifically saying all the names of the people who are going to play a really important role later. And believe me, there are like 60 names in the story, but I've only mentioned people who are going to play an important role.
Okay, makes sense.
So around 3 a.m., by this time it was November 1st, which was a Saturday, the apartment's Halloween party began to die down. At which point, Arpana started to return to her apartment to catch some sleep. She was last seen by numerous people leaving an apartment on the first floor and heading back to her own apartment, which was on the third floor of the complex. Over the next hour or so, neighbors on both sides of Arpana would recall hearing sounds which sometimes sounded like muffled moaning, and apparently around 3 a.m. there was some activity in her apartment and people around her could hear it. One of Arpana's neighbor, Kyle Rose, would later remark that it was around 8 a.m. on the Saturday morning he was awoken by quote unquote a horrible growling sound which persisted for around 20 seconds and was punctuated with a solid thud sound. He then heard the sound of running water in Arpana's apartment, which lasted for about an hour. But he didn't think that this was bizarre because both Kyle and Arpana would regularly hear each other on the other side, and they both used to. Arpana and Kyle used to tease each other about being able to hear each other all the time. Arpana Jinaga talked to her family every day over the phone regularly and had spoken to her family the night before the Halloween party, which was Thursday, October 30th. However, the weekend of the party, Arpana would not answer any of their calls and would fail to call her family back, which was very unlike her. Arpana had not yet surfaced by Monday morning and would fail to show up for work on November 3rd, which was a Monday. So Muhammad Ali, one of Arpana's bosses at EMC Dell in Bellevue, would attempt to call her several times on her cell phone, but he could not get in touch with her. At the same time, her family was desperately trying to call her, having not heard from her since Thursday evening. Eventually, the family would reach out to a family friend who was Arpana's father's former student and who by this time was a professor himself in his early 30s, a man called J. Bodhicherla. J had only visited Arpana once before, and he arrived at the apartment complex at around 9 a.m. on Monday, November 3rd of 2008. He noticed that Arpana's bike was not parked in its usual spot and was trying to locate Arpana's apartment.
He has been to Arpana's apartment only once. So, how is it possible that he knew the place where she would park her bike usually?
So it seems like her bike was her sort of cherished possession in life, and she would regularly post about it on Facebook. And they had previously spoken about this bike because, I mean, as an Indian female, it's slightly unusual to have a bike of your own anyway. So apparently, he did know that she had a bike and it would be parked at a specific space.
Yeah, that's justified.
As Jay was looking for Arpana's apartment, one of her neighbors, Cameron Johnson, happened to be nearby, and together they decided to enter Arpana's apartment to check on her. But her door swung open the second they knocked at the apartment door. It was quickly clear to both of them that the door leading into her apartment had been forced open and that the door jamb was broken. As both Jay and Cameron walked inside, they immediately noticed that the studio apartment had a potent smell. They were overwhelmed by the smell of chemicals and also the smell of a decomposing body. Professor Bodhicharla frantically called 911, and in that 911, one can clearly hear him sobbing and screaming in despair into the phone. Cameron actually had to take over that phone call, and he spoke to the dispatcher and gave her as much information as he possibly could. Soon authorities arrived at the apartment, as did the paramedics, and they could all see that someone had clearly kicked the door frame and all the bolts were broken. The authorities could smell and could see that bleach was used extensively all over the crime scene and that there had been an attempt to clean up the scene. Bleach had been haphazardly been poured all over the living room, over the table, and it had spilt over several spots on the carpet. There was a trail of bleach everywhere in the bedroom and even outside, where Arpana's body was found. The investigation of the crime scene also found burn marks everywhere, and there was also an oily substance all over the crime scene. This oily substance later was found to be motor oil. This made it really hard for the CSI team to collect evidence. And what's worse is it seemed like the perpetrator had used toilet cleaning bleach, which is very, very strong and can have about 98% of acid. All this was used to scrub all over Arpana's body. In the meantime, J. Bodhicharla went to the Redmond police station to confirm for the police that the body they had found was indeed Arpana's. His phone was ringing continuously, and he did not have the heart to inform his former professor that his daughter had passed away. He instead informed his own cousin, who then physically went to Dr. Jinaga to inform him of his daughter's demise. Later on, Dr. Jinaga called up Jay and simply asked him one thing: was there any chance of survival? According to the police spokesman early on, what investigators were finding indicated a homicide, signs of a physical struggle, potential signs of sexual trauma, but they would remain tight lipped in some days to come. Arpana's body was taken to Kings County Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy to determine the cause and manner of her death. Days after the discovery of Arpana's body, a ceremony was held in Redmond which had all the customs of a Hindu memorial service and was attended by dozens of people whose lives Arpana had impacted during her short stay in Seattle. Her body was then flown back to India so that her family could perform her last rites. The Jinaga family was stunned at the sudden loss and struggled to move on. In the meantime, the forensic examination report had made the following observations. They found that Arpana was found on the floor, and it seemed that to the police that Arpana had been gagged. In the meantime, the forensic examination report had made the following observations. They found that Arpana was found on the floor, and it seemed to the police that Arpana had been gagged with her own underwear, which was held in place with a piece of tape. It appeared to the police that at some point her underwear had been taken out of her mouth and was then placed on top of a paper plate which also had a crust of a pizza which was found in the kitchen. Her tampon had been found near her body. Her nails and her entire body had been thoroughly cleaned with toilet cleaning bleach. She had chemical burns all over from excessive cleaning. The police also noted in their report that there were little burns all over her carpet. There was a burnt paper towel found at Arpana's feet and other burnt items relevant to the crime. Indicated not only that this attacker had attempted to clean up after himself, but had also attempted to burn everything to the ground. Whatever oily substance was thrown all over the room was obviously used as an, but thankfully it did not work. In Arpana's bathroom, the police found signs of cleanup. Her comforter, her bed sheet, which were missing from the bed, were found soaking in a mixture of water and bleach in her own bathtub. Partially burnt items were also found, for example, a green blanket, a red cape which appeared to be part of her own Halloween costume, as well as a black sheet. A handful of other items were noticed to be missing from Arpana's apartment. For example, her BlackBerry cell phone was missing, her camera was missing, one of her IDs was missing, and of course, most importantly, her motorcycle was missing.
Okay, all this bleach used was from her own apartment.
That's a lot of bleach, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a lot of bleach.
Or maybe she just used to buy things in bulk from Costco, so we don't know. Or we're not even sure if all the bleach was from her own apartment or did the perpetrator his own bleach. So one doesn't know. Eventually, it was revealed that Arpana had died from asphyxiation, which authorities had already theorized based on the shoelace which was found and marks which were seen around her neck. Her injuries, aside from all this, were absolutely endless. Arpana had suffered from multiple blunt force blows to her head from an unknown object to the point where her teeth were absolutely smashed. It was also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted. The fact that she was found naked and someone had tried to partially cover her up also was found to be interesting.
It appears the person who covered her up might have felt remorse.
Yeah, well, yeah, or maybe he was just, he couldn't see the face after what he had done to her. So it could be anything. We don't know. We don't know, right? According to the coroner, it seemed like the attack on Arpana had occurred sometime between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. That was her time of death.
Okay, it seems somebody took a lot of time cleaning up. Once she was, killed, using a lot of bleach on her body, around her, in the washroom. So it must have taken a lot of time. No doubt it was 3 to 8 a.m.
Right, but then that's the approximate time of death. When the coroner says that someone died between 3 a.m. to 8 a.m., that's because they cannot pinpoint the exact second somebody's heart took the last beat. Okay, so it's basically a approximately really long period of time, but you're absolutely right. It takes an insanely long period of time to clean up an area. Probably it's much easier to kill someone than to clean everything up. Yeah, so you're right. It must have taken a really long time. The police issued what's called a be on the lookout notice, a bolo, for the stolen and missing items from Arpana's apartment. After some time, a mechanic saw the police notice and contacted the police that Arpana had actually dropped her own bike to get some work done prior to her murder. So turns out her bike was not actually stolen. The police continued to try to speak to residents to create a list of partygoers in order to question everyone. They tried to speak to everyone and they tracked down a lot of people, but it was a difficult task, specifically because there were so many people who were going in and out of these apartments on the night of Halloween.
So do we know who were these people, like random people off the street, or someone all these apartment owners knew?
So it turns out that all of them had gotten together and decided that they would invite people that they already knew in their lives. So their friends, their family. So there were people who had invited their brothers, their sisters. So basically, the idea was it would not be random people off the street. It would be somebody known to all these residents. So whether I knew someone from that another person's family or not, but as long as that person knew, that would seem to go. That seems to be the idea behind that. Indians all over the US were very upset because there had been a large uptick in hate crimes against people from India. For example, in 2008, many Indian grad students were killed. For example, Akla Devi Srinivas, who was a 29-year-old man, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in Pennsylvania in the US. In December of the same year, which is 2008, two PhD students from Andhra Pradesh, Chandrasekhar Reddy Koma of Kurnool district and Alam Kiran Kumar of Karimnagar district, were found shot to death at Louisiana State University. Similarly, a research student from Jharkhand, a man called Abhijit Mahato, was also shot to death in his apartment in North Carolina. So there was also some speculation that this could be a hate crime. But given the brutality of this crime against Arpana, the police worked really hard to find people who might have killed Arpana. They landed on their first suspect very quickly. This was a man called Cameron Johnson.
You mean the same guy who helped Professor J get into the apartment?
Yeah, it's the same Cameron Johnson. It was the next door neighbor.
It's always the neighbor.
Okay, hold that thought. Okay, hold that thought. The police first questioned Cameron Johnson on November 5th of 2008. This was 2 days after Arpana's body was found. Cameron Johnson said that he didn't remember much of the Halloween party. He told the authorities that he had shown up very intoxicated and showed up really late. He also said that he had spent very little time at the party before heading back to his apartment to call it a night. However, he later told the police that sometime around midnight he couldn't really fall back to sleep. He said that around 3 a.m. he was awoken by a strange moaning sound coming from Arpana's apartment. He said that he believed this to be sounds of consensual sex, and immediately after hearing this, he himself decided to text his ex-girlfriend. This was around 2:59 a.m. He initially just said hello. When he was asked why he had sent this text to his ex-girlfriend, he said he was looking for someone to hook up with. He then said that after sending this text, he decided to go back to sleep and continued sleeping through the night until around 8 a.m. At this point, he said he woke up and then he randomly decided to call Arpana once, but because she did not pick up the call, he didn't think much of it. Initially, there doesn't seem to be anything strange about Cameron's story, right? However, authorities discovered that numerous witnesses and residents at the apartment expressed concerns about Cameron Johnson. They said that when Arpana had first moved to Valley View Apartments in Redmond, she apparently befriended Cameron right away. And Cameron and Arpana spent a lot of time together. Arpana then bought her motorcycle and quickly expanded her friend group, and their friendship dwindled. And then they stopped hanging out altogether. Cameron Johnson apparently was not happy about this. Now, all this is being informed to the police by the residents. According to witnesses, he showed obvious signs of jealousy and anger, and apparently, that particular night, which is the Halloween night, he exhibited jealous behavior when Arpana would speak to other males who were attending the party. When authorities began to dig around a little deeper, they found a lot of alarming things about Cameron Johnson. For example, they found that Cameron Johnson's when authorities began to dig around a little deeper, they found a lot of alarming things when they searched Cameron Johnson's phone. They discovered that Cameron had not just reached out to his girlfriend at 2:59 a.m., he had actually placed two calls to Arpana around 3 a.m. Cameron told the authorities that he did not remember calling Arpana just minutes before he had called his ex. In his police interview, Cameron Johnson in fact told the police that he remembers calling Arpana around 10 a.m., not the 3 a.m. calls that the police actually found. Eventually, Cameron Johnson admitted that he thought that he had Eventually, Cameron Johnson admitted that he thought that maybe he had called Arpana to try to hook up with her, and he claimed that before that night he had never really seen Arpana in that light. He said that she looked great that night at the Halloween party, so maybe that's why he decided to call her up around 3 a.m., but he said he didn't remember any of this. Cameron Johnson later told the detectives that he even drove to the Canadian border that night, which, by the way, is a 2-hour drive from Redmond, and then he was denied entry, so he decided to come back to his apartment.
I'm very confused. Cameron keeps changing his statements.
He does. And in different police interviews, he admitted to different things. For example, in one of the police interviews, he basically said that he couldn't sleep. Then he said he tried to text his girlfriend. Then another one, he suddenly reveals that he did try to, enter the Canadian border, but because he did not have his passport, he didn't have any particular reason. So he was basically turned back by the Canadian authorities. So it's very strange. You're right, he does keep moving his statements around. The police also questioned a female neighbor called Leslie Plotz, who worked in a cafe and lived directly below Arpana. She had attended the party and had invited her friends, and especially a friend called Emmanuel, to attend the party. Emmanuel, by the way, was the same guy who was punched in the nose by a man called Neil, and Arpana had helped Emmanuel staunch his nosebleed. There's even a picture of Arpana and Emmanuel together. Okay, Didi, we're going to stop our first episode of the Arpana Jinaga story here. This is a really long story. It's already a very long recording. So I'm going to tell you the rest of it in the second episode. So until we see you the next time, stay collectively vigilant.